Hello everyone, welcome back to another OCD recovery YouTube video. Today it's actually really funny. So long story short, my dad had undiagnosed OCD. One of his biggest compulsions was spending. It was ridiculous. So I have like 400 plus shirts. Yes, Rob makes fun of me all the time. So I have shirts I haven't worn in years. So I'm just going through and wearing different shirts for the YouTube videos because I have so many of them. It's funny actually, I never used to wear dress shirts. And now I'm actually really into dress shirts. Even besides like my other job, I just enjoy wearing dress shirts, which I never thought. I always wore like skin tight Armani Guido shirts, and I was like orange. If you're in the WhatsApp groups, you see the pictures of me that go around from 2011, 2012, when I worked at the store with the Jersey Shore cast. It was ridiculous. So I want to talk about, great opening. I want to talk about why I don't recommend and why we don't really recommend tracking compulsions and tracking your recovery process in the way that maybe sometimes we see it kind of perpetuated in the OCD and anxiety community. So before I go any further, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button. Again, I say this every time. It's really good for the algorithm. We're really trying to, just look at it from a different perspective because we're seeing things now, anecdotally, years and years have gone by and we're like some of this has applicability to say milder cases. In that chronic OCD case, there needs to be such a large amount of uncertainty and confusion that goes in with the unconditional self-life, other acceptance, that it needs to kind of, some of the things that we're doing just can easily become compulsive. It is important to remind you that anything can become compulsive. I mean, anything. So like, disputing your irrational beliefs, chasing feelings from exposure, compulsively trying to push recovery, compulsively trying to read all the material, or avoiding and not reading the material. So it goes all over the place. So the first thing I want to talk about is tracking rumination. And I'm going to talk about, as I do in many videos, what a lot of people get wrong, what I got wrong, and what catapulted me to OCD recovery once I realized how rumination actually operates. So if you're afraid to go on a plane, if you have a death fear, OCD or not, just for the example, if you are deathly afraid of going on a plane, just looking at the plane will fill you with intrusive thoughts, sensation, images, urges, combination of a couple, all four at the same times, sympathetic response, sweaty hands, fogginess, irritability, just like the fear of fear response. That will shoot off automatically for the majority of the time because one is scared. Now, there's a semantic difference between analyzing and then rumination. This is, yes, rumination. When you're having the intrusive thoughts, images, sensation, and you sit down and you're trying to figure it out like a math problem, right? So, this is ruminations like buzzing around your head and you're like Albert Einstein and you're like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. You put your spectacles on. Well, I won't want to go, okay, this is that. That analyzing rumination can actually be brought down pretty quickly. You'll still do it automatically because you're still scared. But another good one, the ROCD example. If you have the fear of being attracted to another person, the fear of loss of connection / being in the wrong relationship, and I'm out to dinner, say I'm looking at Erica right now and someone goes by, a waitress, and my brain's like, are you more attracted to her? Did you check her out? Do you think your life would be better with her and all that? And then you look at your wife and you feel not connected. Maybe you have a little bit of HOCD mixed in there and you feel there's no connection. All that automatic rumination, all those intrusive thoughts, that is firing primarily because you're scared. So there's no reason to track that. Once you understand how OCD operates, that's one of the most important parts about going through the OCD and anxiety recovery journey, is understanding the practical application of how rumination works, why themes change, why we have setbacks, why we have relapses. Understanding the practical outlook of these things allows you over time to unconditionally life accept how the disorder works, and it could pop up in a year, for all this stuff. So that's why it's important. But tracking the rumination becomes really compulsive because that's engaging with the thoughts as they're coming. So let's say you go out to dinner, that same ROCD scenario, and you're out to dinner and you're having rumination for 50% of the time. And you come home to your journal, you put your spectacle back on. I want one of those spectacles, like those Monopoly ones. I don't think I could pull it off. I'll try. I'll go to the gym with it. And you're like, okay, so I had 23 rumination images. I had 21 rumination thoughts. And then 2 weeks later, the same thing happens. And you're like, okay, I felt 92% better. All that type of tracking is very compulsive. It's actually the opposite of the uncertainty and the acceptance that we want when we're going through the recovery process. So we don't need to actually track anything like that. Now, on the flip side, when it comes to outward exposures, let's look at contamination OCD, a very easy one. We all know that contamination OCD sufferers, and we're not talking about the belief, maybe the core belief is, what if I get contaminated, contaminate my mother, then my mother dies? That belief is so strong, you'll need to break that down with unconditional self-life, other acceptance. But say you're not touching doorknobs, you're not touching plates, like all that stuff, you'll more than likely want to set yourself a hierarchy. You still don't need to really track that, but there is some applicability. So say, you go back and you're like, okay, right? And you got this, and this is the problem. I'm gonna try to give you some benefits, but also the potential issues. So let's say you have, like week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. And we start with like putting your hand on a dirty counter, right? And you leave it there for 20 seconds. Putting your hand in a garbage for 30 seconds. Going and touching, like wiping your finger on a public urinal or a toilet and not washing your hands. I know that sounds really scary to some. And then working up to your biggest exposure. Sometimes with the outward exposures, if you throw someone in this category right away, they just freak the fuck out and it's very hard for them to continue forward. So it kind of diminishes the purpose of it. So with the outward exposures, there is some applicability to tracking that stuff, but not really in the way that we imagine. You can do it, but it also can become compulsive. A balance is always key. So the other thing too, when it comes to tracking your recovery process, and then what do we hear a lot, which is understandable. The reason why I talk about this, like when you hear me speak in the webinars, right? And you hear me talk about, look at life, right? Usually graduated high school between 18, maybe 17, 19. Some people at 15 if they're really smart. I had a teacher like that. You think he was in college at 16. Interesting. Common cold, 7 to 10 days of an antibiotic, usually good. Break your leg in half, 6 to 9 months. Med school in America, 4 years undergrad, 4 years med school, 3 years residency, and then depending on what you want to do after that, if you want to go into a specialty, and all that type of stuff. So we have these like set guidelines. Most businesses fail in a year. It takes 29 days to change a habit, like all this different stuff. Well, a lot of that actually isn't set in stone. It's just kind of what we see anecdotally. It's not like every single person graduates at 18, but we have these set standards. With OCD and anxiety, it just doesn't work that way. It really comes down to, are you putting the work in? Are you being compulsive about recovery? More than likely, yes. We all become compulsive at some point. Are you doing the things necessary? So let me give you the things that you probably do want to track. Let's talk about maybe some things you want to track. 1, have you read the books on the reading list? 2, are you doing your exposures if needed? Not everything needs an exposure. Sensory motor does need an exposure. A direct exposure, because my saliva, blinking, salivation, heartbeat, those were all my exposures and they were happening all the time. If I'm not breathing, guess what? I'm dead, or I'm Vecna from Stranger Things. I'm sure he breathes too. I'm such a nerd. I'm already watching Stranger Things Part 4 again. Rob was like, please leave me alone. I'm just like, that's what I do. I'll watch the same documentary 35 times in a row. Don't even get me started on songs. So maybe that's compulsive, probably. But I just like doing stuff like that. So when it comes to tracking the deadlines, it's not really necessary. Now, it is important. Like, let's say you're working with someone, whoever it may be, coach, therapist, whoever it is that you're working with, doesn't matter who you're working with. We just want to make sure they have a good understanding of OCD, not usually just a surface level, a good understanding. And then we want to realize, okay, if a year goes by and we're not seeing any progress, like we might still be anxious here and there, but are we getting better with the relationship with our anxiety? Are we getting better with sitting it there? If nothing is changing in 1 to 2 years, you have to change something. Something needs to change. A year is a really long time. I'm not saying you're going to be 100% recovered in a year. I've been working on recovery for over 2 years. And my perspectives are still changing on certain things. I was talking to Rob the other day, how I had a really good perspective about something that had to do with like politics and like people yelling at each other. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's just kind of another way people stay trapped, because there's no real such thing as like a left or a right or a middle, Democrat, Republican, conservative. It's just like people with individual belief systems, and it's just like we categorize people, and it kind of just like punched me in the face when this person was talking to me. That's where the true recovery happens. Like these, when you're doing your disputing, right? That's another thing. Well, should you track your disputing? Well, when you're doing your disputing homework, you want to remind yourself that you're not going to have those perspective shifts usually when you're doing the homework. Like, so let's say you have 15 minutes every other day, you're doing the homework and how to stubbornly refuse, you're doing some sort of REBT dib sheet that you found online, whatever you're doing, breaking down exposures and stuff like that, or doing exposures. Usually, that's not where perspective shifts happen. Perspective shifts are happening. This is why, the behavioral component of REBT, rational emotive behavioral therapy, cognitive B, behavioral therapy, the B that's happening in those, the behavioral changes, in my opinion, is where the perspective shifts are happening. When you're out doing things, right? Like maybe you see a car accident when you're driving on the highway, like a horrible car accident. Then you read about it in the news, the family passed away, and you just think to yourself, holy shit. Like, I'm really fortunate to be alive right now and live in a really good time period, and I don't live in 900 BC. So those are when the perspective shifts, in my opinion, come. They usually don't come when you're doing your actual homework. They can. Didn't really have a lot. I had to show myself that I had to wear my sensations out there, but I never really tracked anything. I didn't track rumination. I didn't track hierarchies of exposures, which I can understand. I started to track my disputing, which became a compulsion because I was like, did I dispute 6 days a week? Did I dispute? And I was tracking that with content I was making with OCD recovery. Okay, I have to make sure I make 3 pieces of content a day. This is why tracking can be a problem in anything. So the way I live my life now, which is, I can't even believe I'm saying this because it's so opposite of what I did in grad school or what I did the majority of my life. I wake up and I have goals that I want to hit: gym, business things, content. But I used to have sticky notes, right? I'd be like, this is what I have to do this time. And I still have a schedule. My scheduler's up there in the living room, and I have a list of what I want to do that day. But for the first time ever, I don't hold that list to gospel. I'm not like, oh my gosh, if I don't do this, it's terrible. It's like, sometimes I miss 70% of the things on my day, on my list, because things just go haywire, right? You run a business, or maybe you're an employee of a big company. Things just get thrown on your desk. Your employer might be like, do this. And you're like, holy crap, I got to do this. I got all this stuff I have to track. So tracking progress can be a big issue with OCD. I also think it could be a big issue with non-OCD sufferers. And I know this is the unpopular opinion. I was listening to a terrific video today. Alexander will laugh if he watches this. The channel, I like Philosophy of Life, and the other one's called Ixolinganger. Yeah, something. It's a philosophy channel. And they were talking about, it wasn't Taoism. It was talking about trying to force tracking, in business or anything like that. And they were saying that people try so hard to force something, even when things go their way. It's not because they're forcing it. It's just because of the way that the world works, and we have no idea why. And then when they're trying to force something and it doesn't work, they freak out. When in reality, whether you force it or not, doesn't actually matter. What matters is life just moves, and you respond to your environment. So you have no control over your environment, and you just, over time, you just respond in a different way from changing your perspectives. So that's really, I kind of went from why tracking rumination, hierarchies of exposures and stuff like that, and the more philosophical talk. It's interesting. The more rational I get, the more philosophical I become in many different ways. And I think that's one of the biggest byproducts of recovery. I think it's amazing. It's just interesting, little things that I don't even realize why. It's so wild what happens on the backside of recovery. And then what happens is, once you get better, you start to, especially if you do what we do or what I do, you start to talk to people and you kind of forget how bad you were suffering, which is another perspective shift I've had. I remember working with some of the sensory motor sufferers, people I have currently, thinking oh my God, that was me. That really was me. I was that stuck. And then again, we break down everything about, why we don't track rumination, why tracking apps are definitely a slippery slope. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, kind of a combination of a philosophical talk and then tracking. Comment down below, hit that like button, subscribe. And everyone knows, comment down below. Ask me anything, agree with me or not agree with me. One thing I've gotten extremely good at is having any type of conversation, whether the person agrees with me or not. That has taken me 3 years. at least 3 years to actively working on that to be able to really adopt unconditional other acceptance. But I'm a human and we all slip at times because we're fallible. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. If you're still with me, as always, have a great day.